Welcome everyone to this multi-country telepresence session, and let me welcome our guests from all across Central Europe and Eastern Europe. We have with us today journalists and reporters from Bulgaria, Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania and Serbia. And we will shortly kick off. Joining us from Moscow today is Dave Evans, Cisco's chief futurist and chief technologist of Cisco's Internet Business Solutions Group. Some of you actually might have met Dave already on some similar telepresence sessions, as well as some conferences. And as you know, he's usually talking to us both about longer term provisions and trends. We were just chatting about time travel, in fact, just before, but also on shorter term trends that he sees in the industry. And he will be covering both topics today. We welcome your questions. We have roughly 90 minutes for this session, and we will leave time for a Q&A towards the end of the session. But if you have any specific questions in the meantime, I think, Dave, you are fine to take questions as well.
Absolutely. By all means, jump in if there are any questions as we cover the content.
Thank you. One more practical information. Dave is going to present to you the results of a global survey. And I know that obviously you're always interested both in the global and European trends, as well as what's happening in your own countries. And in this regard, let me just tell you that we do have data from some European countries, but on specific countries which have joined the session today, my proposal is that you can have some follow-up conversations with my colleagues who are in the various offices. We are happy to share with you thoughts and insights on bring your own device trends specifically for your country. So they will be giving more of a global and European overview today. So with that, Dave, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Judith. And good morning, everyone. Pleased to be here. So what I thought I'd do today is cover BYOD from a global perspective, as Judith mentioned. And while BYOD as a topic itself is not new, one of the things that we were very intrigued by were some of the numbers around BYOD. We've heard about BYOD, bring your own device, consumerization of IT, and we wanted to dig just a little bit deeper and understand what some of the differences were between some of the different regions around the globe and some of the sentiments around BYOD. So the organization that I'm in at Cisco is called the Internet Business Solutions Group. And you can think of IBSG as Cisco's strategic consulting arm. We work with Cisco's top customers at the executive level. And one of the programs that we have in IBSG is something we call the Horizons program. And it's a research program where we go out and we talk to hundreds of companies around the globe to get insight about different trends. And while today I'm going to talk primarily around BYOD, we also have research going on around collaboration, video, and other trends that you might expect. So today it's primarily around BYOD. First, just by way of backdrop, I've met some of you before, but let me just spend a minute or two explaining my role at Cisco. So I'm the chief futurist for Cisco, and I spend my time looking at where the world's going from a technology perspective as it relates to Cisco customer solutions. So IBSG is composed of about 10 or so industry verticals, financial services, retail, transportation, manufacturing, and so on. My role as chief futurist is to work with those customers to help them understand how to bring technology, predominantly network technology, to bear to solve some of their business challenges. So I'm looking at a variety of different trends, big data, Internet of Things, consumerization of IT, BYOD, and one of the trends that we're spending a lot of time looking at is the Internet of Things phenomenon, and which will lead to BYOD. So let me touch on that briefly. IoT, or Internet of Things, we see as actually coming in waves. Now, when we've thought of Internet of Things, we've sort of thought about a exponential curve where the number of devices has grown sort of steadily over the last few years. And the latest research that we've done indicates that perhaps that's not quite the case. It's more of a set of waves that have occurred. And if we look at sort of Internet of Things back in the 90s, the phenomenon was where you went to the device. You went to a fixed computing machine. You were the mobile device, not the mobile part of the equation, not the device. And then in sort of late 90s, 2000, that was sort of where mobility really started to take off, where instead of you going to the device came with you. So we sort of flipped the model upside down. And now we're moving into an era of the Internet of Everything, the Internet of Things, where while there's perhaps 10 to 12 billion devices connected to the network today, over the next decade or so, we see that number ballooning to 25 to 50 billion devices, so a significant number of devices. And all of these devices, of course, are creating massive amounts of information. And whether it's video or photos or email or applications, we're seeing a massive amount of information being generated by these things, BYOD being one subset. And one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in is how technology now is adapting to us. So for many, arguably, since the inception of technology, we have had to adapt to the machine. We've had to learn new interfaces. We've had to learn new paradigms for how to adapt to technology. And now technology is adapting to us. It's becoming flexible. It's understanding us on our own terms, whether it's speech or vision or gesture. And it's coming with us. The device, the technology is now everywhere. It's pervasive and it's mobile, which sort of leads us to the BYOD study. Now, as I mentioned, this study was done as part of the IBSG Horizons study, and we surveyed about 4,900 IT leaders, people that were decision makers in companies or were influencers of their company's mobile solutions. And we talked to everyone from the individual contributor, the manager, the director, the vice presidents, and also the CXOs of those companies. So we spoke to the CIO and everyone beneath the CIO. And we talked about 18 different industries, and these industries were everything from banking, financial institutions, education, public sector, healthcare, hospitality, so a broad sort of swath of industries we surveyed. And if we look at some of the regional breakdown, we looked at about 900 or so respondents from the United States, about 600 plus from Latin America, about 1,500 from Asia, China, and India, and then the rest from Europe. So the UK, France, Germany, and Russia, about 1,800 or so. And so a pretty broad breakdown both from the individuals that we spoke to as well as the regions that we spoke to. And as I mentioned in the opening, while BYOD itself is not necessarily a new phenomenon, we were very interested in understanding the differences between regions and the sentiments across those different regions. So it should be no surprise that around the world, mobility is pervasive. Very few, it's very rare that you run into someone that does not have a mobile device in their possession. And what's interesting, though, is while we found about 60% of knowledge workers that use a mobile device for work, only about 47% of them actually required that device for work. And what that says is that the remaining users, knowledge workers, chose to use a mobile device. It was by choice, not because their job required it, but because they felt that it made them more productive or was beneficial to their role. And we also found that about 40% of employees telecommute at least once per week, enabled predominantly by BYOD phenomena. This would be something they simply could do did they not have a mobile device or BYOD, a device to enable them to telecommute. So about 40% telecommute about once per week. And then if we look at some of the breakdown of those users that use a mobile device, we see that about between a half and 2/3 of them use a mobile device for work. And the US and India sort of lead, and then the rest of the countries are about sort of 50+%. And we find that the European nations in general, while slightly behind some of the rest of the world, are still very enthusiastic and embracing of BYOD trends. We also see that the growth curve of mobile devices is increasing. And this year, the number of devices on average per knowledge worker is about 2.3 devices on average. And we see that number growing to about 2.8. So almost 3 devices per person in the next couple of years. So today, while predominantly users may have a laptop and a smartphone, we're seeing devices like tablets being added to that equation. So having a tablet, a laptop, and a smartphone becomes sort of the common sort of kit that mobile users have. In terms of the number of devices and growth, you can see the breakdown here. We see that the growth in the U.S. is perhaps slower than some of the areas because they're fairly far advanced in terms of BYOD. And then we see significant growth in areas like China and India. China today is about 1.8 devices per person. We see that going to about 2.7 devices per knowledge worker. So China and Russia are growing quite steadily in terms of the number of connected devices. From an IT spending perspective, we see the spending also increasing in BYOD as a percentage of global IT spend. Today, it's about 18% of IT spend is spent on mobile capability, and that's not just the devices, that's the infrastructure and the apps and the ecosystem, if you will, required to support all these mobile devices. So about 18% today, growing to an average of about 23% in the next couple of years. And China, with a very enthusiastic investment in BYOD, about 22% today, growing to about a little over 31% in the next couple of years. So quite a big investment in China. We also see quite a big investment in India in terms of spending on as a percent of IT spend. And it's no surprise that BYOD is here now. As I mentioned in the onset, we were interested in some of the trends that and the regional numbers around BYOD. And what's interesting is, and this is a number that really surprised me, 42% of employees own the smartphone that they use. And that's not necessarily that surprising. But what is surprising is that 38% of the laptops that employees have are employee-owned. So while you'd expect employees to buy their own smartphone in many cases, it actually surprised me that that large of a percent of employees also bought their own laptop, about 38% of laptops. We also see the strong growth in BYOD over the coming years, with about 63% of the respondents saying that they expect that the percentage of employee-owned devices to increase. So a very healthy growth rate in BYOD. And Asia, Latin, and America lead right now in BYOD adoption. If you sort of look at some of the breakdown of laptops, smartphones, and tablets, we see that as their way, they get to adapt their work style to their job, and allows them to collaborate with one another more efficiently. It allows them to have a healthy blend or balance between sort of work-life balance. So if they're using the same device, they're not context switching back and forth between their work mode and their home mode. So they're free to do some personal work on their work time and free to do some of their work on their personal time. So it's a healthy balance between the two. And then, of course, from a company perspective, there's a big benefit when employees pay for the devices instead of the employer paying for the devices. So these are the top 3 benefits that we saw to BYOD. Then in terms of some of the breakdown of what the IT leaders have seen in terms of employee productivity, you can see that collaboration and productivity about 18%, job satisfaction was 16%, and then the cost reduction. And again, not surprising, but China is really leading in terms of productivity through BYOD, about 24% relative to the rest of the respondents. Job satisfaction is the highest at 21%, and then the cost reduction at 20%. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are some challenges with BYOD. The top 2 concerns that we saw were around security threats and privacy of company data. I mean, if you consider when you have a BYOD or a mobile device, and you have corporate data on this device, when this device walks out the door, potentially it's walking out with corporate information. So how do you secure this device, and how do you secure your company information? So threats to security, the fact that new types of devices are connecting to a corporate network, these are some of the issues that were top of mind for IT leaders. And then the second big area that was top of mind was how do IT departments support all these different types of devices? When an IT department dictates what the device is and the operating system and the applications, there's more control over that device. But as you start to introduce more and more types of devices, different tablets, different phones, different laptops, there are more and more challenges in terms of how you support more of these devices and these types of applications. So security and providing support for multiple different types of mobile platforms were top of mind concerns. And in terms of security, France, Russia, and China had the highest, were the companies that had the highest percentage of concerns as it relates to security from a BYOD perspective. And interestingly enough, China were less reluctant to embrace BYOD, even with the balance of some of the security challenges, because they felt that the benefits far outweighed the security challenges that BYOD brought. Now, if you look at the some of the work that still needs to be done around mobility, and this shows sort of a breakdown of some of the policies and challenges that need to be put in place from companies. Only half of the enterprises and about 40% of smaller firms had a policy in place regarding employee network access for mobile devices. So while the acceptance of BYOD is high and we're seeing a significant growth curve, there's still a lot of opportunities for for companies as it relates to putting policy in place around managing mobile devices. Now, from an employee perspective, employees love BYOD because it gives them flexibility. It gives them control over their work experience. They get to work the way that they want to work. They're not dictated by the device. They get to choose the device that best works for them. So they want freedom, essentially, to work the way that they want to work. They also want flexibility in not just the device, but also where they work. As I mentioned earlier, 40% of employees work or telecommute at least one day a week. They want flexibility on the device and flexibility where they work and how they access their corporate information. And what we find is that by giving employees choice, it fosters employee-led innovation. So they get to choose the applications that they want, they get to choose the devices that they want, they get to work in the style of work that works best for them. And it's not just BYOD, not just bring your own device, we're also seeing a huge increase in employees wanting to choose their own applications. And if you think about when employees can choose their own applications, sometimes when employees pick their own applications, you find a gem out there. I'll give you a real-world example for Cisco. Years ago, some employees brought in instant messaging, and at the time it was not a corporate sanctioned application, but employees used instant messaging, and it was found to be incredibly productive. It's now the #1 application that we use to communicate and collaborate internally, and that was an innovation or a insight that employees had. And would you rather have 70,000 of your employees looking at innovation opportunities, or a handful of IT employees looking at them? So when you empower your employees to bring in applications and devices, productivity and capability goes way up. So employees want to bring in their own applications as well as their own devices. But we're not, from a regional perspective, we're seeing that China, India, Mexico, and Brazil are more positive towards non-approved applications. And in Europe, there is perhaps more conservative of a nature when it comes to non-approved applications. So China is certainly leading the way, where 71% of the respondents are receptive to non-approved applications, as compared to, say, France at 27% or Russia I'd say 16%, which is pretty stark difference between some of the regions. So sort of key takeaways. So it's no surprise that BYOD is here. It's here to stay. It's growing. It's happening around the world. Granted, in different regions, it's accelerating at different rates, but it's pretty prevalent globally. There are various degrees of support and enthusiasm depending on the region that you're in. The United States, Asia, Latin America are perhaps more bullish on BYOD relative to some of the other regions. And by giving employees control over the types of devices and applications that they choose while balancing business risk, it allows your employees to be significantly more productive and collaborative. And we're seeing increased spending from an IT perspective as it relates to BYOD. And then from a network perspective, of course, as we introduce more and more types of devices and more personality of device types on the network, that introduces additional considerations in terms of security, management, and recognizing those different types of devices that are being connected. So with that, that's a quick look at the survey. As I mentioned earlier, as part of the IBSG Horizons program, we do these same types of surveys for other types of emerging trends, whether it's big data, whether it's collaboration, whether it's video. This was our BYOD sort of quick summary. And as you had mentioned, this was a global perspective, and we can certainly share with you offline some of the things that are more specific to your region if those numbers are of interest. So with that, let me pause and see if there are any questions.
Many thanks, Dave, and we are then open for your questions, as Dave said, and obviously our topic today was BYOD, but I guess, Dave, you wouldn't mind if there are questions coming on other trends that you are seeing
my sweet spot is living in the future. Those are the kind of questions I really enjoy, but I'm happy to field questions on BYOD as well as other future-related technologies.
So, who would like to start?
And then maybe I would ask, are any of the numbers that we shared, are there any surprises? Are these numbers that you've seen, you're expecting? Are there surprises between different regions? Perhaps you expected one region to be higher or lower. I was particularly surprised by the number of laptops owned by employees, 38%. That I thought was unusual.
Second question in Belgrade.
Yes, go ahead, Tiana.
You mentioned corporation are managing devices, policy of devices. Can you tell me more details about that?
So companies are, when I say policy of devices, some companies have policies around the types of devices you can bring on, the profile of the device before you can connect it to the network. So for example, certain device might have to have virus protection on it before it's allowed to be connected to your network. But what we found is that less than half of the companies actually have policies in place that sort of dictate to their employees the types of devices that you can bring onto the network. Instead, one of the trends that we're seeing is the detection of the type of device as you connect it to the network. So things like, we call it NAC, NAC, Network Admission Control. So technology is built into the network itself that examine the profile of the device as it's connected. So although you may have a policy in place, it may be written down on paper, that does not guarantee that every employee follows it. So while I think that's important from a cultural perspective to explain to employees what the acceptable use policy is for devices, it's also important that you have the right technology in your infrastructure to protect it against unexpected devices that might be connected.
And obviously Cisco has a number of technologies developed for this, like they mentioned as well, and we are happy to arrange some demo sessions for you on various technologies, including something new we call Identity Services Engine. So feel free to follow up with my colleagues in the rooms as if you want to experience, how it comes to life on specific devices, we can definitely show it to you. Any other questions?
Just to add to the
Okay, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just to add to the ICE thing for a second. I mean, for those of you that have seen some of the other presentations I've done, one of the things that we find, which is really interesting, is that devices that we have not traditionally expected to be connected to the network are getting connected. We talk about, how trees are getting connected and clothing's getting connected and drugs are getting connected to the network. It's not just mobile devices, it's all sorts of devices that are going to be connected. And by some estimates, less than 1% of all the things that could be connected to the network are currently connected. So what does the world look like when, your car's connected, your home's connected, your clothing is connected, your pets, your kids? I mean, all these things are starting to connect to the network.
Thank you. We have a question from Budapest, Dota.
My question is, have you seen any major differences between different industries, how they embrace BYOD, or were the geographic differences more significant?
Well, certainly from a geography perspective, we see huge adoption in China, as I showed in some of the slides. In terms of the industries, we do have that information. I'll have to get back to you on it. Off the top of my head, we see a lot of mobile technology, certainly in healthcare. We see a lot of mobile technology in retail and financial services. Those would be the top three off the top of my head, but we can get you the specific numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Romania.
Yeah, we have a question for you. What are the fields where you're stating that the productivity might increase? And where do you think with this BYOD concept that the productivity may decrease? What are the industries?
So the question is, what industries will productivity increase and what industries will they decrease? So we'll have to follow up with you on the specific industries, but as a quick reaction, I can't envision an industry where productivity would decrease as a result of BYOD. I see only an increase in productivity, because when you give employees and knowledge workers the ability to work wherever they want to work and work however they want to work, that is a catalyst for increasing productivity. So I can't think of an example where it would decrease. In terms of increase, we'll have to follow up with you on specific industries for that.
And Dave, maybe it's interesting to mention also the generational aspect here, if you can elaborate on that a bit.
Sure. Yeah, we did and we can certainly share this report with you. We did a Connected World report about a year or so ago, and we studied a wide demographic of the people using mobile devices. And it was interesting. We found that people would rather take a lower paying job if they had freedom and flexibility on the choice of device and connectivity that they had. They'd rather make less money if they had that flexibility. And we found that particularly true with the younger demographic. If you think about, for many of, let me sort of age myself for a moment. If you look at sort of my age demographic, I grew up where there were no mobile devices. They came to being, a decade or two ago. If you look at sort of my children as an example, my children have never known a time when they didn't have a mobile device, they didn't have a laptop, a smartphone. So their expectations and their thought process around mobile devices is quite different. It's not an introduction for them. It's not a new capability. It's the way it has always been. So the mindset is quite different. And what that means is when they go into the workplace, their expectation of their future employer is quite different. They expect to have freedom, flexibility. They expect to be able to work from anywhere. They expect to be able to use new mobile devices, tablets, smartphones, laptops. So there's quite a stark difference in mindset based on age demographic. And we should follow up definitely with the Connected World report. There's some really great data in there. It's also regional and it goes into a lot of depth about the mindset around BYOD, connectivity, work your way, and just how people think about kind of the world going forward.
Thank you. We have a question from Serbia.
Yes. How do you see a future adaptation and change of mobile operators when we're talking about the future needs of end users and all of the things that you mentioned in this presentation?
So let me see if I understand the question. Is the question, how do we see mobile operators evolve as a result of BYOD and to this phenomenon?
Yes, yes. Also
Okay.
in terms of software change and adaptation, and also in hardware change adaptation.
Okay. Okay. Certainly from a mobile perspective, there is, I think one of the things that mobile operators are thinking about or arguably struggling with a little bit today is how to monetize some of these new services. So, we're seeing billions and billions of new types of devices being connected to the network. What are the revenue streams for that? What types of new services might mobile operators offer, and how do they monetize? And yet, weighing that challenge against, they spend billions of dollars putting in infrastructure to support a given standard. So maybe it's 3G. They spend billions of dollars to support its 3G infrastructure. And then along comes 4G or LTE, and yet they haven't finished necessarily recouping the costs from the 3G infrastructure. Now we're on 4G, and before long it'll be 5G. So I think part of the challenge is how do you recoup the investment in infrastructure while at the same time continuing to offer new services and monetize or look for new opportunities to monetize all these billions of devices that are being connected. So I think that's an evolving sort of challenge for mobile operators. I'm not sure we've cracked the nut on that yet, but there's certainly many opportunities, and I think that's something they're still thinking through.
So actually, you're expecting from mobile operators to manage all those policies from different kind of devices.
I think in some cases they'll manage it themselves, and in other cases they'll offload that management to other providers and to the enterprises, and in some cases to the end users themselves.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Our next question is coming from Sofia, Bulgaria.
Hello, my name is Martin Beshev. I would like to ask you about how can Cisco address the top concerns in security in BYOD?
Well, so we address it in a number of areas. We address it obviously from a consulting perspective. So groups like IBSG exist to work with customers to help them address some of those challenges. We also address it from a technology perspective. So we have a rich portfolio of products that security suite. ICE was one, the Identity Services Engine, which was mentioned. Our firewall products that do deep packet inspection. So we have a whole portfolio of products, security products to address it, coupled with our expertise in consulting to address it. So there's a variety of ways that we tackle it.
Thank you.
So we have a question from Hungary.
Hi, Dave. This is Gabor Nagy from the Hungarian Financial Weekly. And if I may go back to the slide of the non-approved applications, why do you think there is a gap between Europe and the rest of the world? Do you have any data in your survey? Is it that the employers are reluctant to approve applications, or is it that the employees are reluctant to bring in applications to their devices with the company? Thank you.
We do have the data, and we'll share that with you. All I can say at this point is that we found that many of the European countries were simply more conservative in terms of approving or acceptance, if you will, of non-approved applications. And we can share with you the data behind that. Off the top of my head, I don't have it, but we can certainly follow up.
So this is the employers, the companies?
Correct. The companies themselves. Out of the 5,000 or so that we surveyed, we found that Europe, in many ways, was simply more conservative when it came to BYOD. It doesn't mean that they're not pursuing it. It doesn't mean that they're not optimistic about it. It simply means that relative to some of the other regions, they were a little more conservative. Where China, for example, to contrast, was perhaps a little more aggressive than, let's say, the European countries.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Germany.
Hello, I'm Vicky Gale from CRM. You said security is a challenge when it comes to bring your own device. So do the majority of the companies already realize these new security threats, and do they have a security strategy?
Yeah, so we found that less than half of them have a written policy around BYOD. I think just about every company recognizes that security is a challenge. And it's a matter of weighing the business benefit around productivity and work your way against security challenges. So it's recognized, but the policies in place perhaps lag the adoption of the BYOD trend itself.
Thank you. Any next questions from any of the locations? Okay.
If I may have another one, you talked about the healthy balance of work and private time on the mobile devices. Do you think that there is a temptation of being an unhealthy balance, like you are working on your holidays regardless of what your wife or husband would like to do and things like that? I have some personal experience with that. The unhealthy.
As do I. Yeah, as do I. No, I think like anything, people can get addicted to technology, to their device. There are cases where, in some cases, someone loses their device. They literally go through withdrawals because they don't have their device at hand. But as I mentioned to someone yesterday, it's great that we're always connected, but not at the expense of connecting to one another. And I think it's important that we take time. I mean, this is why devices have off switches on them. It's okay to turn them off on occasion and spend time with one another. It's easy to get addicted to being always connected, but it's important that we take the time to connect with one another. So yes, it can happen, but technology is a tool, and it's how you choose to use it. But yeah, we do see that phenomenon too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any next questions? So while you're, yes?
Where do you see challenges when we talk about security matters? For example, if there should be only encrypted tunnel as a VPN, antivirus protection, anything else that you have in mind when you're talking about security challenge that end user and corporation altogether demands?
Yeah, but I think one of the big challenges is that, these devices today, we call them phones, and perhaps that's the wrong nomenclature. Maybe we shouldn't be calling these phones anymore. We should be calling them personal computers, because that's really what they are. And if you look at the capability of those devices, the storage capability, the speed capability, they're pretty powerful little devices. And the amount of storage and content that you can place on them is pretty significant. So one of the challenges the companies face, translation, is that company IP can walk out the door on top of that, on that device. So, managing what gets on that device, policies around acceptable use, how content is destroyed when the device leaves the building, perhaps, who has access to that device, because in many ways this becomes a portal to connect to your corporation. If you have access to this device, you have access to the corporation. So I think, encryption is important, connectivity is important, but also data protection is important. How do you make sure that the devices are, you don't leak intellectual property when the devices walk out the door? I think that's a big challenge for companies.
Thank you.
And the same is true, with the laptops and other devices. how often do people lose their laptop? They leave it on a train or a plane or in the back of a taxi cab. And it's not just the hardware you're losing anymore, you're losing the IP that's on that device. So ensuring that device is secure, encrypted, locked, so that if it is lost or stolen, that your data, your company information is not compromised. That's very important.
And additional question to the previous one that I asked, what do you think maybe mobile operators could be the one center? I mean, they could offer the service of managing all devices that could appear on the market. Devices for pets, devices from the car, when the car is connected, clothing and anything else that you mentioned. Maybe mobile operators can offer that kind of service as a one center that can develop the actual policy for all that various kind of devices that you mentioned. What do you think about that future challenges for mobile operators and possible service from their side?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's an interesting observation. I mean, I'll give you an example, and I've used this statistic before. In my home, I have 42 devices that connect to the network. 42 different types of devices that I have to manage and think about. Many of those devices have billing issues with them, management issues associated with them, different quality of service depending on the device. There's downtime for different devices. I would love to be able to offload all of that to someone and say, okay, that's your problem, bill me monthly, instead of having 10 bills for different things, instead of having to manage all these things separately. Yeah, I agree. There's potentially opportunities for companies, operators, and others to simplify that for the consumer. You know, we have, phone bills and cable bills and internet bills and smartphone bills and, all sorts of, complexity. And as we add more and more and more devices to our world, clothing and medical devices and so on, we run the risk of making that more complex. So I think that certainly that's a possible opportunity for companies to simplify that for the end user. So I would agree with that observation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just one second, and we go back to Bucharest, Romania, has a question.
Mr. Evans, speaking about the money, how much do you think will be the BYOD phenomenon in Cisco business in 10 years as a percentage from the total revenue? And how much does it mean now?
Yeah, I certainly would not try to project any sort of financial implications for Cisco, so I really don't have a response to that.
Will it be important in 10 years from now, the BYOD?
Of course. No, I mean, of course, the whole BYOD trend, Internet of Things, all these devices being connected, absolutely. I mean, we connect all of these devices. I mean, Cisco, our network is the infrastructure that allows all of these devices to connect. So absolutely, this phenomenon is an important part of our business.
Thank you.
We have a question from Hungary.
My question is, will the cloud be the answer for some of these security concerns? Because we don't actually store anything on the device, just use it as a means to access it. That's sure a lot more safe.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, a great example is desktop virtualization. If you put your desktop in the cloud, first of all, from a convenience perspective, it means you can access your desktop from any device. You're not limited by the operating system or the hardware anymore because your desktop representation is in the cloud. And then if that employee leaves that company, they're not taking their desktop and their IP and their applications with them because it's in the cloud. The enterprise, the company has the opportunity to simply disable that and turn that off. It's also being backed up regularly, so you don't have to rely on the end user to back up their device. If it's in the cloud, you can back up the content in the cloud. So absolutely, the cloud is a huge part of the equation in managing all these devices and aiding in the security and simplification of all of these devices. So yes.
Thank you. Germany, we have a question.
No more questions here, Judith.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from any other location? If not,